Okay, so today we're going to be talking about what RHEL is going to do next. Any guesses as to how old RHEL is as a distro? 14 years. Pretty good guess. Yeah, pretty much spot on. You just looked it up? Okay. Yeah, RHEL's about 14 years old. And 14 years is an awful long time to be doing the same thing and still have it be working. RHEL is continuing to grow at an enormous pace. At the same time, the world is significantly different than it was 14 years ago. My taste in music has certainly changed. I like to think I have better judgment now than I did 14 years ago. Anyway, I think you guys get the idea. Like the world is significantly different, and what we're doing with RHEL now is we're trying to make RHEL more responsive to the way that things actually work today. We have this intuition, and I think you'll all agree with me, that RHEL has reached this moment where it's actually getting in the way often, more frequently than it's helping. And the good news is we're all here together today to participate, in keeping with the theme of the show, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about ways in which RHEL can actually make your lives easier rather than more difficult. Does that sound like a fruitful endeavor? Does that sound like something worth doing? All right. So let's start here. RHEL, not bad. 13 years, because that's when I wrote this slide. It was actually 13 years ago, but you're right, now it's probably about 14. We are the leading paid Linux operating system, so that's great. Right? Good for us. About 66% of the installed server market, and please don't go Googling and looking at these numbers and being like, it's not 66%, it's 44%. Like, I know. It's like all these numbers are different depending on how you cut it up, but these are the numbers my marketing guys gave me, so these are the numbers that I put on the slide, right? Okay, so 66% of the installed server market. If you take the entire RHEL market and combine all the hardware and the software and everything that is kind of connected to RHEL, it represents like basically a $16 billion market, which is pretty amazing, right? And this is even more fun. This huge growth in what I'll talk about mode 1 and mode 2 in a second, but this change in attitude, this move towards the cloud, where containerization, microservices, DevOps, et cetera, all of that, as you guys know, all of that stuff is being done on Linux. And if you look at the server shipment statistics and the market share statistics, you'll see that there is actually an organic share shift going on, and actually Linux is beginning to win and versus Windows. We're actually in a world now where it is either you're running Linux or you're running Windows, right? There's very little Solaris left. There's very little HP-UX left. And so now kind of the battle lines used to be, it was Linux versus the proprietary Unix guys, right? That was kind of where we lived for 15 years. It's a different kind of a competitive environment now, as you guys might have noticed from all the announcements on Monday, is that in one sense now we're working very closely with our partners at Microsoft, and in another sense, we're basically the only two soldiers left on the field. Right? So that creates a very different dynamic in which RHEL has to function. So back in 2002, when we did our first Red Hat Enterprise Linux, right? You guys remember the history, right? It was used to be able to buy Red Hat Linux for $30 at Best Buy, right? And it gave you a year support, and if you renewed it, great. If you didn't, that was fine. You could do it. And then we did the great split, right? The grand schism, where we took Red Hat Linux and turned it into, on the one hand, Fedora, which was going to release every 6 months, and then into Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which was going to have kind of an enterprise lifecycle, the 2-year commitment, the 10-year commitment, and so on and so forth. You guys know the story. So that was back in 2002. And what we were optimizing for back in 2002 were these 4 characteristics that we thought somebody would pay for, right? We thought if we were able to deliver award-winning support, an ecosystem of both software partners and hardware partners, right, which is very significant. We'll get back to that in a second. A peerless security response team and lifecycle options. That's the 2 years, the 10 years, the EUS, the Z streams, and all the rest of it. If we were able to put all of that into a Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscription, then people would be willing to pay money for it, right? And that freed us up, actually. That Fedora Red Hat Enterprise Linux split actually allowed Fedora to thrive in its own way and allowed Red Hat Enterprise Linux to thrive in its own way, right? The problem with Red Hat Linux is that it was trying to be both at the same time. By splitting them up, we let both of them be successful, right? So great, it worked out pretty well, right? It turns out. So as you guys know, with a Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscription, that gives you access to every current version of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Today, you could be running 6, 7, 5, hopefully not 4. But that's part of the value of RHEL, right? You can jump around between versions. We don't charge you to upgrade from each major version. And as a vendor, as a creator of a Linux distribution, there's very little you can do inside the subscription model to add value over time, right? And so what we've done as Red Hat over the last 15 years is we decided that the way that we're going to continue to add value to the subscription over time is to keep releasing new versions, and really that's just code for stuffing more things in the bag, right? And so back in, so from 2002, we started with, you got the cluster file system options, and then you guys remember SC Linux, added support for Power and Z, virtualization, and then of course you remember virtualization, and then we had the SVirt work, and then control groups, and then OpenSCAP, and then we added the Gluster and Ceph stuff, and then the real-time kernel, and now it's all about containers and software-defined networking and all the rest of it. Just more and more stuff in the bag. On the current trajectory, Denise can back me up here because Denise runs RHEL engineering. Denise, how many packages were in RHEL 7? More than 6,000 packages. And on the current trajectory, if we were to release a RHEL 8 today, that RHEL 8 would be probably about 10,000 packages. That's 10,000 Lego pieces just for you. You just dump them right on the table, and you get to put them together however you want, right? So that represents a problem. In fact, it actually represents like a logistics problem for us, like publishing 10,000 packages and managing the combinatronics of 10,000 packages, and God help it for you guys, like managing the interdependencies between 10,000 packages, that it's going to be bananas, right? It would be completely unmanageable. So we got to do something. Just to illustrate the problem, you guys might have heard of the term dependency hell? Yeah. Yeah, lived it. Yeah, I think all of us have scars, inside and outside. Yeah. No depths. So this is the legacy of RHEL in this world of 10,000 packages. This is a graph of the Firefox package dependency tree. So I do RPM. I do something as innocuous as wanting to install a web browser. I do RPM, Firefox, enter, and in come 483 packages behind it in order to make it run, right? That dependency tree solves a certain kind of an engineering problem and creates a certain kind of a user experience problem, which you are all extremely familiar with, right? So this world of managing an operating system, a set of operating system components at this level of granularity is becoming increasingly less useful, right? Now imagine doing this for all 10,000 packages, and you get the idea. If you go online, you can Google for the Fedora dependency tree graph, and it is horrifying. So what are we going to do about it? Oh, first of all, let me check. Does all that make sense? Does that all comport with your understanding of the way the world works? Yes? Okay. So I'm going to use the terms mode 1 and mode 2 and immediately ask your forgiveness. This was. I think this was more popular about a year ago, but it is still talking about mode 1 and mode 2. I think is still useful as a vocabulary. It's an emotionally satisfying fiction, right? The world is not quite that black and white, but it's useful to kind of define the axes against which we're working, right? Mode 1 is basically a very traditional enterprise operation, which is heavily focused on efficiency, right? Mode 1 is devoted to basically preserving hardware resources, right? And it is very careful, and it is very methodical, and it is very conservative when it comes to releasing new software, testing things out, making sure everything's perfect before it goes into production, and then don't touch it. Don't even look at it until we're ready for the hardware refresh, right? That's mode 1. Mode 2, inspired by all this teetering tower of abstractions that we've built for ourselves with containers and cloud and virtualization and all the rest of it, that has enabled a much more agile infrastructure. You guys know the story. And these guys are much more focused on agility, right? And it also represents a renegotiation of responsibility for the operating system and the operating system software. In a lot of cases, when you move into mode 2, you see the developer becomes much more responsible for the overall application stack, and there's no longer a clean line between what an operator or a sysadmin is supposed to do and what a developer is supposed to do, right? Everybody with me? Okay. Do you think that might have some implications as to what we need to do with an operating system, right? Thinking? All right. So to illustrate this a little more carefully, when people say enterprise, most of the cool kids with their Birkenstocks and their Ruby and their Gems and their Node.js, most of them hear expensive, right? Somebody hears stable, another person might hear old. Supported means for amateurs. Comprehensive means bloated. Mission critical means complicated, right? So again, RHEL has this challenge of needing to serve both the traditional enterprise base, which is extremely valuable and is doing great work, while at the same time preserving its value for this new kind of a customer who thinks differently, uses a different set of vocabulary, and uses a completely different technology stack. And the hard part is, those two customers often exist inside the same organization, right? They might even have the same boss. So this is a slide I use a lot, and it kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. So you'll hear a lot of the DevOps folks as one of their favorite diagnostic questions for an organization is, how many times do you release, how frequently do you release your application or your stack, right? How frequently do you refresh? If the answer is every 6 months, you're over on the right-hand side. Or maybe it's every 20 years, which is not unusual for some of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux customers, right? We frequently get questions for, can I just keep this exactly as it is for like 20 years? Is that okay? Can you support this 20-year-old kernel? Like, that happens more frequently than you would imagine, right? Now, over on the right-hand side, if your answer is, I release 10 times a day, right? Then I can make some I can make some probably pretty good assumptions about the kind of infrastructure you have, the kind of culture you have, and the kind of application development that you're doing, right? So again, the challenge for RHEL is to serve both the folks on the right-hand side of this and the left-hand side of this at the same time. This is hard. All right, so now we will have an airing of grievances. The following 3 slides are the greatest hits of complaints from Red Hat customers and partners. And I want you guys to chuckle and laugh and hopefully validate a lot of this stuff. Let's start with the hardware vendors. Hardware vendors, they create a beautiful piece of silicon, right? And they need to get it into the market. And it is utterly useless unless it has an operating system to light it up, right? So that makes RHEL a blocker for hardware guys, right? They don't like having blockers. They don't like having a RHEL release being in the way of them getting to their customers, right? So frequently, that means, actually, we have an extraordinary partner organization. Where is Sue Denham? I saw her walk in here. There she is. Raise your hand, Sue. There she is. Sue Denham. Yay, Sue Denham. So Sue Denham is the unsung hero of our partner efforts. So Sue coordinates between a bewildering number of OEMs, device makers, chip makers, and all of them have 2- and 3-way meetings with all the OEMs and all the partners together, trying to make sure that the Red Hat Enterprise Linux release lines up with the hardware releases, lines up with all the enablement stuff. They make sure that all the stuff is upstream before it ends up shipping inside the subscription. It is an unbelievable coordination effort, and I can't believe it actually works. But Sue makes it happen. Thank you, Sue. Now that said, that especially as the universe is moving a lot more quickly now, right? The world in which used to be, we had like 3, maybe 4 OEMs, right? We had IBM, Dell, HP, and then we added Cisco. And now, if you look at the shipping server statistics, about 20% of the servers probably don't even touch an OEM as we understand it. It actually goes from ODMs straight into one of these cool kid companies like Google or Facebook or something like this, right? So that means the hardware market is actually changing and moving much faster because they're not necessarily going through a full kind of enterprise release cycle before the hardware hits the customer. But still, all that enablement has to happen inside the upstream kernel, inside the tool chains, and inside Red Hat Enterprise Linux. So that's hard. Here's another piece of confusion is you as a customer, it is probably harder than it should be to know when you're running on hardware that is certified. And further, it's probably hard for you. Raise your hand if you understand what it means to have certified hardware for RHEL. Okay, actually better than I thought. It is in fact a DoD requirement. But what it means to be certified, they're certified and then they're supported and then there's best commercial effort. It's very complicated and there are a lot of moving parts in here, and it's not obvious when you're running on a complete stack of hardware with the operating system to know what's in the boat and what's not in the boat, right? And that creates a risk for you, right? It should be much easier to kind of discover that information. Oh yeah, and then joke's on us, see if you've read the slide. Joke's on us, because if you're running on a cloud, all of the value and all of the work that we put into this is completely invisible to you, right? Oh well. Okay, so let's go to software vendors. Software vendor, and this includes both if you're a customer developing software for RHEL and if you're an independent software vendor. if you are developing for RHEL, you'll frequently see ISVs, despite we tell them not to do this, but they do it anyway. They will say, please run only on RHEL 7.2, right? So what does that do? That solves a specific problem that they have around dependencies and making sure that things are stable and all the rest of it. They're doing it for intelligent reasons. But when an ISV says, you have to certify on RHEL 7.2, what that forces them to do is they hug that release, right? Which means that you may not be able to necessarily update your hardware as frequently as you would like. It means that you won't be able to update your operations as quickly as you would like. When customers or ISVs, when you hug minor releases, it creates a lot of bad secondary actions. It slows the entire data center down, right? You can't have access to all the stuff that you want to have access to because you have this like perfect stack that is on RHEL 7.2, right? And now you got to come back to Red Hat and pay us for extended update support so that you can stay on that and ride the Z stream, right? In order to get the security updates, right? That is actually a problem that we created and are simultaneously solving. That doesn't seem like a good user experience, right? We should, in fact, make it a lot easier for ISVs to certify on one set of APIs or one set of stability commitments and let them ride that for whatever, 10 years. And it shouldn't matter what else we do under the covers. They should be able to rely on Red Hat's promise that we are going to be stable on this thing for this long, right? That would solve actually a lot of problems with coordinating the stack. Okay. And then customers. Raise your hand if you enjoy Red Hat subscription management. Not one hand, huh? That's interesting. All right, so maybe we'll try and solve that. Again, this goes back to the hugging the minor release problem. When you hug the minor release, the operating system is very closely tied because of the dependencies. You have the application that relies on the operating system set of dependencies, and I'll get into that in a second. That creates all the bad dynamics that I talked about earlier, but it also creates this interesting model where an ISV will begin shipping their own dependencies because they don't trust the dependencies that we're shipping, right? And so now you've got this universe where you got like, okay, well now I got to get some ISVs now shipping their own copy of NSS or OpenSSL, right? Like that's horrifying, right? That is dangerous. That is dangerous stuff to have happen, right? But we're actually encouraging that behavior. If you're managing a large set of, when I say here large installs, I don't mean like number of instances. I mean like large, like a big install. Like raise your hand if your first move on a RHEL machine is to do the full install because you don't want to be bothered with paring it down. Liars. Someone here is fibbing because I know you guys do this. So there are many approaches to this. There's like do the full install and then like carefully take out like Portuguese, right? And make sure that nothing breaks, right? And then it's a little bit like playing Jenga with RPMs, right? Is you want to like, right? So that is a typical minimization pattern, right? Wouldn't it be cooler if you could just install like a base, a minimal RHEL, and by here I mean like a for real serious minimal RHEL, and then build up based on the dependencies that your application requires? Wouldn't that be nice? All right. Okay, yeah, I think I've belabored that. Okay, so those are the three kind of personas that we're looking at: the hardware, the software, and then customers. Have I missed any big ones? He said, afraid of the answer. Okay, good. I like it. All right, we'll go with that. So in 2016, here's the first principle. As I said, we do have to serve everyone over on the left-hand side of my map, and we have to simultaneously serve everybody on the right-hand side of the map, right? That means that award-winning support, that is still very, very important. Having a huge ecosystem of software and hardware vendors, that is also still really, really important. Having the security response team in place is more important now than it ever has. You'll see, I have a hypothesis slide here later that talks about that. And I won't steal my own thunder by talking about it now. And then, again, the lifecycle options, right? For the foreseeable future, the IT market is going to need a Red Hat Enterprise Linux distribution that makes a 10 or 13-year commitment on stability, right? Those seem like pretty good guesses. But these new cool kids also need some other stuff. So remember when I was talking about stuffing more things in the bag? right? We keep putting more and more packages in here in order to deliver value. Over the last 15 years, we've really carefully trained you guys, which is great, this is actually a good thing, to use the operating system as a source of trusted software. You know that if Red Hat is shipping software in here, you know that it is going to be taken care of, you know that we're going to take care of the security fixes, you know that we're going to kind of make sure it's integrated with all the other packages that we're shipping. That is a really interesting behavior, and I wish we could say we did it on purpose, but it is actually true, right? It's the distribution long ago stopped being about just a simple Linux distribution that lights up hardware and enables applications. It's now also a source of trusted dependencies and libraries and applications, and you guys rely on it, and I know you guys rely on it because we get RFEs every day for like, hey, can you ship this version of Dot, or can you ship this version of this hinky video editing software, or whatever the thing is, right? And it's because you guys want us to take care of it because you don't want to take care of it, which is great because that's exactly what right. Hey, this guy likes the idea of Red Hat taking care of it. Okay, yeah. So to the extent that we can make more software available, and here, this is very important, make more software available more quickly, then the Red Hat Enterprise Linux subscription value becomes more valuable for you guys, right? That makes sense. Paradoxically, you guys, the cool kids, also want less software actually on the disk, right? I want an enormous library of software that Red Hat is going to do security patches and fixes and all that other stuff for, and also I want like 0.1% of it actually on my disk. Like, just give me the kernel and the glibc and let me take care of all the rest of it, right? So that's kind of interesting. So this notion of like curating that library of software becomes really important. And if you think about when you're building your gold disk or your base image or whatever, that is really much more about curating out of this library that Red Hat has provided you. I think that's a useful way to think about what we're doing. Non-disruptive updates. I got a thumbs up here already. He doesn't even know what I'm going to say. If we could enable new hardware without disrupting any of the ABIs in user space, wouldn't that be pretty sweet? Wouldn't that be real cool? That would be really interesting if we could do that. If we could update software on, if we could update the hardware. Yeah, right, this guy holds up a Mac, thanks. So if we could, and so that means two things, right? So first it means that there has to be some kind of a contract between the user space and the kernel and the toolchain stuff. There has to be some kind of API there so that we can kind of replace stuff without disrupting anything. But it also means that we have to get specific about what the ABI, what the OS ABI and API, what that actually looks like, right? So that the application doesn't get disrupted. It's really interesting if we could pull that off. And then finally, I kind of hinted at this earlier. Raise your hand if you hand edit your kickstarts. Come on. Yeah, okay. Handcrafting kickstarts with VI remains like the 80 to 90% use case for managing a RHEL base image, right? It is 2016. It seems like we could do better. Emacs. That would be a... There's always one. And this guy's a product manager. He might actually mean it. So if there was, and as it turns out that for individual servers, people do hand edit their kickstarts and kind of do manual configuration work and stuff like that, which is all fine. Once you get past like 20 machines, that's when you start bringing in stuff like the Red Hat Satellite or other automation tools, Ansible and Friends, to kind of make it repeatable and make it a little bit easier to manage this large estate. And as it turns out, my guess is 80 to 90% of RHEL customers, maybe more than that, actually have RHEL managed not by individuals at keyboards, but is actually being managed by robots. Right, as a shorthand, right? There are almost no affordances inside Red Hat Enterprise Linux to be managed by robots. We've had some early attempts at things like OpenLMI, and we're actually doing some very interesting work on the storage API, like creating a common storage API to manage the storage subsystems. Cockpit was another move in the right direction, but there is a lot more that we could do inside RHEL to make it manageable and make it easier to automate not just the kind of day one installation of RHEL, but the ongoing management of RHEL. Make sense? Okay. Did I miss anything?
When you say robots, you mean like
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, when I say robot, I mean like all the Chef, Puppet, Ansible, like whatever your chosen automation configuration management, that whole category of stuff. Yeah. Shell scripts, right? So one of the challenges as we go and try and solve some of these problems is we're also keenly aware that there are tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands of RHEL systems out there being managed by 15 years worth of crappy shell scripts. Right? So we have to be able to do this in a way that is not going to jack up 15 years worth of the customer base. This is like priority number one. It's hard. Okay, so here's what we're thinking. If people want to make more hardware and software available more quickly, then first of all, we need to do what I just said, which is not jack up the existing ecosystem, right? We need to keep that in place, like keep everything. If you want the next RHEL to feel like an incremental improvement on RHEL 7, that is the experience you should have. Like we shouldn't upset the apple cart, right? We shouldn't invent new science there. At the same time, we need to create more affordances to expand the customer base, so that if people want to go and work on containers, or if they're going to go and work on the cloud, we need to be much more open and welcoming to that kind of use case. Second, if you want less software installed, then we also have to reduce the number of dependencies inside the packages, right? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. Some of them a little more dangerous than others, but as a general principle, getting ourselves out of this dependency hell, and because we are, again, if we released RHEL 8 with 10,000 packages in it, all of us in this room would be caught in this spider web of package dependencies, right? So we have to reimagine or think of new creative ways of getting out of that trap, right? Oh, and making minimization choices obvious, right? So doing a base install, doing a minimal install, doing the full install, we have to get a lot more disciplined and have to be a lot more careful about what a minimum base RHEL promise looks like, and actually think about it as there is a base RHEL, and then there is a universe of other stuff that you can stack on top of it, but that is a second step. It's not just one undifferentiated monolith of 10,000 packages, right? Okay, so non-disruptive updates. As I said earlier, oh yeah, okay. So I'm gonna use the words AUS, TUS, EUS, ELS, C streams, extras, commons. Sue, help me out. Optional. EOL. Okay, so raise your hand if you feel like you have a good understanding of all those acronyms. Yeah, so that's probably a problem. That's probably not good. Over 15 years, we've actually earned a great deal of, I guess it's kind of technical debt, but you could almost call it like contract debt, right? We've refined the Red Hat model over the last 15 years to accommodate all different kinds of customers who have all different kinds of lifecycle needs, and we didn't always put obvious names on each of these offerings, right? So if you didn't know anything about Red Hat or anything about our ecosystem or a subscription model, and I told you that you needed to get extended update support, would you have any idea what I was talking about? No, you'd have no idea what I was talking about. You wouldn't know if I got updates through an extended update support contract, would that actually disrupt my application? Like I don't know. Nothing in that name tells me about the promise that Red Hat is giving to me. So rationalizing that whole bundle of 15 years worth of promises and making them clear, making them obvious, is going to be very, very important. That's obviously tied to making subscription management much easier, right? Finally, stabilizing the platform to ease the introduction of new environments and versions. This is the set of contracts, again, that I'm talking about with if you can imagine a base RHEL, which has a certain set of promises that it gives the next layer, which has a certain set of promises that it gives this vast library of RHEL software, right? Having those promises be explicit and tying our stability promises to those contracts rather than here's a bundle of RPMs that are frozen in time, right? That seems like a better way of describing the promises that Red Hat is making in terms of stability, and also making it easier for ISVs to not have to hug minor releases, because they have a different set of they have a different set of contracts that they can work against. Because RPMs right now are the only thing that they have, right? That's why you guys, anybody who's managed a security scanner, they're like, oh, well, this version of Apache is vulnerable because it says right here it's Apache 224, right? And you guys know that it's not vulnerable because the RPM is actually up there. All right. So that is the kind of behavior that we need to run away from, right? Because the problem is that we're looking at the wrong level of granularity, right? We need to think a little more expansively about how ISVs make promises and how RHEL provides on those promises. Okay. Decoupling hardware enablement, that's the trick of what if you could take your application stack fully certified, and when the next version of Intel stuff comes out, you could just slide in a new kernel, like a magic trick, right? Like pulling a tablecloth off the table, right? Denise has got her hand in her head. So if you could swap out a kernel and a tool chain underneath your existing certified stack and have everything still work, and if it broke, it would be Red Hat's fault, that'd be pretty sweet. Everybody in engineering just kind of sunk a little bit. Okay, and then finally, automating RHEL. So if folks are using more automation, RHEL is now heavily optimized for somebody who has fingers on a keyboard. If we could instead optimize RHEL for these automation use cases, that would probably make people's lives easier as well, right? Okay. Okay, so now I have left us plenty of time for questions and answers, because I'm sure you have a bunch. And in the spirit of participation, I put a little piece of robot vomit up in the upper right-hand corner of this slide. That's all that is a link to my little vanity URL down there. That'll send you to a Google forum where we're going to ask you some questions about how it is you use RHEL, what your preferences are, and what you find valuable in an operating system. That information is obviously going to go into a spreadsheet, and that is going to be an enormously valuable set of information for us as we go and figure out how we're going to go solve these problems. So I encourage all of you, tell your friends, any Red Hat folks in here, tell your customers, please go to this URL, fill it out. We really are going to use this information in our planning, so please help us out. Thanks.